The lights across the sky seemed almost peaceful tonight. It was hard to believe that so much had happened in the last few months. The world was reeling from the sudden death of my mother. She was the biggest horror novelist of all times, Jacqueline Candor. I was among them, though for far different reasons. My father had raised me. I had not seen my mother since I was little. With her death, I was suddenly heir to the island she owned off the coast near Seattle, Washington. My father had passed a few years ago, leaving me alone. I had no ties to the island, no reason to go, yet I found myself wanting to know more about the Horror Queen. I had inherited everything, including her boat, the Blood Siren. There was no excuse I could find not to explore this part of who I was. And still, I hesitated. It seemed as though the timing was suspect. In the week after her death, the skies above the United States turned an ominous red. People started to fall ill from sun poisoning. We were advised that unless it was an emergency not to go outside. People, as a group, are stupid and ignored the instructions. So the police had to get involved. Living in the city and dealing with the martial law made my decision for me. The island, with all of its mystery, was safer, or so I thought. I believed that at the very least being on the island would protect me from the ones who blamed her death for the sickness. How could one woman dying cause such an apocalypse? Logic seemed to fly out of the window in the face of fear. I did not expect to find my own fear manifested. I am, by my nature, a logical soul. An accountant professionally. Logically, having assets that were not being used was a poor idea anyway. At the very least, I needed to assess the property and decide what to do with it for the long term. I packed everything I owned. It was not a financially sound idea to rent an apartment when I owned an island. If I decided to sell it, I would be able to find an appropriate rental where I wanted to live. The whole thing felt like it was glass in my stomach. The Blood Siren was a gorgeous yacht, spacious, decked out in crimson fittings. It had the feel of walking into a speakeasy. There was even an ancient gramophone in the master suite with an interesting collection of jazz records. My father was not a fan of music, so I felt a kinship with my mother when I found that. It was incredibly strange to bond with someone you never really knew through something as simple as a song played on a machine made before I was even born. The crystal bottles lined the wall cabinet. The crystal bottles lined across the wall cabinet seemed to be filled with interesting liquids, gold, clear, and amber liquids that a quick smell identified as various alcohols. I figured the cabinet was to keep the bottles from falling across the room during rough seas. I wondered at my mother's tastes. The ship was literally decorated as if it was stuck in the 1920s. Even the clothes that was in the master suite was flapper-style dresses. My mother was apparently the same dress size as I. Exhaustion had me crawling into the master bed with the idea of a nap. I knew I had to pilot myself to the island. I knew the responsibility I bore. I made it no farther than bed. I had at least to I had at least set myself loose from the dock and laid anchor in the bay. It would prevent the determined from reaching me. It would slow it wouldn't prevent the determined from reaching me, but it would slow the others though. My tour of the ship was short. I found the master suite and crashed. My dreams were strange. I could hear chants in the dark and threatening tones. I couldn't understand the language and I couldn't find the speaker. No light seemed to penetrate the shadows of my dreams, and I seemed to be doing nothing but run. I've never dreamed anything like it. Waking up covered in a fine sheen of terror, I could swear that the chant had followed me out of my slumber. Shaking myself to try and pull out from the lingering dregs of disturbing dreams, I got up and headed quickly for the glorious shower and the master bath. Though I found the crimson brickwork strange and the enclosure too spacious, I had to admit that the surround jets were a luxury that I could enjoy forever, especially with the unlimited hot water under enough pressure to massage the stress out of any muscle. Soft red bath sheets and a nice clean silk flapper dress added to the bizarre mindset that I was stuck in. I kept expecting Rod Sterling to step around the corner at any moment. The other rooms on board the ship were decked out in luxury in an amazing warm natural color scheme, but not the master suite. Everything in there was a shade of red, or it was black. It felt like someone was wanting to hide blood stains in the way colors were done in there. Though my mother and I seemed to share tastes in music and clothing, I found her taste in art to be disturbing. Demonic imagery hung on the wall, and weird gargoyle-like statuary strewn about the ship. If I was not worried that I would be destroying some priceless piece of junk, well, I may have thrown them all overboard. The temptation was so very high, especially when I nearly bumped into one of those hideous gargoyles when I walked onto the bridge of the ship. The eyes seemed to follow me as I set about putting in the information to get to the island. I was incredibly thankful for the automation on the controls. I was new to the idea of sailing, so I needed the assistance that the onboard computer afforded. I suppose I could have hired a crew to ease the voyage, but I found myself needing the quiet of alone. Small noises were making me jump. What would I do if there were other people aboard? I set the course and continued my exploration of my mother through her Siren. I found some old first edition copies of her novels in a box hidden away on the bridge. It seemed like a strange place to store books. I couldn't help thinking that they should be displayed. I wondered at why my mother would keep them here. I settled in with a glass of gin, her first horror novel, listening to the sweet notes of jazz warbling from the record. I am strange. I enjoy reading and often read every single page. I was amused to see the first typo on the copyright page. Published in 1920. My mother was not anywhere near that old. I think she was born in 1958. Likely the book was published in 1970. I would have to look up the exact date. I have to admit the book gave me a bit of relief from the real world. I only came up for air in time for dinner. Her style of writing pulled me into the story, making me feel a little lost in the little Maine town the book was set in. When I looked up to replace the record, I gave myself a scare. Sitting in the dark wall across from me was one of those awful statues. This one was female with extended wings and an angry snarl across its face. For a moment, I swear I felt like I was looking into one of those weird funhouse mirrors. The statue must have been fashioned after my mother. After being so focused on the deep psychological thriller that she wrote, I could not deal well with my mother's art tastes. I gingerly pushed the statue into the closet. I did not want to break that particular one, but I also did not like it staring at me. It was weird for me to be enjoying such a leisure. No deadline, no demands. I felt itchy at even the idea. I decided that I would allow myself that day, and then tomorrow I would be more determined in my pursuit of the island. I had stopped the ship before leaving port, as I was unsure of what awaited me on the island. The quaint little galley made cooking feel like an adventure in itself. The blood siren was so comfortable that I started to think of it as a possible home going forward. I was still on the fence about so many things, but I was glad to have the ship. Everything on board was accessible without going out into the sun. I fell asleep in the comfort of the reading chair, only to awake dreaming about the strange chants again. I don't know why I was continually dreaming about that strange chant. I felt odd. My own skin seemed tight. I got up, determined to shake that uneasiness, and started towards the shower. I didn't get far. That demon statue of my mother was set across the room from my seat. I could have sworn I'd shoved it into the closet earlier. I was certain of it. I decided that someone was on board and messing with me. Gaslighting, I think they call it. I couldn't fathom why, but I was determined to find the culprit and set them off of my ship. I spent the next 2 hours searching the ship, only to find myself alone. I was seriously beginning to question my own sanity. The engine had stalled. I was dead in the water halfway between the island and the mainland. I was unsure what was wrong. What I knew about mechanics could fit in the eye of the needle with room to spare. My phone had no signal either. I found myself suddenly alone and stranded. Not a situation I was used to at all. There was a radio. There was a radio on the bridge, but all I was receiving was static. Panic set in. I poured myself a glass of one of the amber liquids that had adorned the wall of my mother's room to settle my nerves. It burned all the way down and left me feeling like I was swimming. Also felt better than I had in years. I always had a tightness in my neck and shoulders. It was just something I'd grown accustomed to. It was suddenly gone. I was not drunk, not like the way the media showed it. I just felt loose and at ease in my own skin. I suppose I was a lightweight for one drink to have such an effect, but it was the first one I have had. I don't know what I should have done. I went to the engine room, and after finding nothing obvious that I could fix, gave up. It was something that I could deal with in the morning, after a good night's sleep. I decided that the master bedroom was a bad idea, so I went to one of the others. The blood siren had 5, and a crew bunk room. It really was a floating mansion. I thought it would make my dreams less scary. The chanting woke me, but I could not move. My body was stuck to the bed, and I was unable to stop what was happening. The gargoyle statue that resembled my mother was moving around me. She was the one doing the chanting. The chanting lasted nearly an hour, and I found myself disconnected from my body. I was able to watch all of what happened over the course of the next 60 years. My spirit watched as my mother controlled the body that was no longer my own. The daughter of Jacqueline Candor had a talent for the same horror stories that her mother had once written. My mother, in my body, would speak to me whenever she was aboard the Siren. I wandered about the ship as I pleased.